All right, let's start. Welcome everyone to the kickoff event for the business analytics competitions. Look like we're going almost virtual this time. Maybe because Mondays mornings or
early Monday,
a lot of students in class. But we record this, so you guys have a copy of this online. Last time we met, we were talking about how to prepare as forming the teams for the competitions. This time is our pleasure to kick off the competitions, the third year's Saunders business analytics competition for students. And if you guys go online now, the data set and the link for the submission has been available. So here is a website for the event. Once you are here, there's several different sections you can jump to. So you can go to either the competition format or how to participate. If I go to how to participate, the link for the competition challenge and the competition website for dataset has been enabled for students. Let's take a look at the first one. In the first link, this is the PDF that outlines the challenge you guys will have for this year competitions. The scenarios for this competitions this year has been set on an e-commerce platform, being challenged with fake reviews on the website. So fake reviews has been a widespread issue for e-commerce in the last few years, especially during COVID-19 pandemic. A lot of people go online doing e-commerce. So fake reviews has been quite prevalent. It is estimated that about 4% of every online reviews are fake. And IT Commerce is a popular e-commerce platform that is so struggling with fake reviews. Now, the fake reviews in our challenge is defined this way. They are reviews generated by actual users who've been solicited by the vendor or the companies to complete and provide positive reviews in exchange for free products. So it is not reviews that's completed by bot that is different. These reviews actually completed by actual users on the website. The companies will approach these different users and say, hey, you want to try these products? If you do, we give it to you for free. Just give us a positive 5-star review once you complete. So in that sense, they are heavily biased reviews. Therefore, they are classified as fake reviews. They do not provide a truthful account of the usage experience. A lot of times, users heavily biased their review. So to face and to address this problem, the company IT Commerce has asked you guys as a consulting team to address this problem for them. They want you to perform the following tasks. And this is important for students who participate to know that there are two sides of the challenge. One is a technical task and one is a business task. The technical task is to produce a prediction model to detect fake reviews on a platform. And this prediction model can be posted to test online in real time using the Kaggle website. So I'm going to go to the website right now. And here you have the link for the Kaggle competition site for the data set. So when you click on it, you will be brought up to the Kaggle website for the competitions. This is also where you can find the data set, the discussion board for the competitions, and the leaderboard. For those of you who are not familiar with Kaggle, it is a data science competition website where regularly company post data set, post up challenge for students and also those who are interested in data science to compete and to learn about data science. We set up this website for students from anywhere in the world to post their solutions and be able to have an easy way to access and compete. So here, let's take a look at the data. These are the data set that will be provided to you. You have altogether 5 different data sets. So the first 2 data sets, the training data set and the test data set for the competition. So the first one, you will use a training data set to train your prediction model. And then you will use your prediction model to apply that and predict the outcome variable in the test data set. Once you finish, you can post your solutions on the Kaggle website. Your solution will be posted in the leaderboard right here. That allows you to see the efficiency of your solution in real time and compare your solution with other teams participating in the competitions. Let me show you guys what the competition looked like for last year, so you guys have an idea of what the last year looked like. So this is also a similar format. Here's a leaderboard for last year. As you can see, we have 7 submissions last year, and team can post a solution in here. The solution will be ranked based on how well the solutions fare against the solutions. You can post a lot of entries, but only, I believe, the last 2 highest score can be chosen for evaluations. So the first team in Smartron, those are the ones also who won the competition last year. Their solution is very well designed and have a score of 0.92. That means that their prediction model has a 92% accuracy compared to the others model. I'm going to pause here to see if there's any question from students or online participants. No? All right. So I want to move on in here. So that's how you post your technical solutions to the challenge. Now, on the business side, we ask you to produce a report that outlines how you come up with your final prediction models. So talk about how did you choose different features or key factors to include in your models. What your final model look like? How is your final perform compared to others model? So talk about your evaluations and model selections. We also include 3 business questions that you would have to answer. The first one is based on your analysis of the models, and we want you to talk about the overall impact of fake reviews on IT commerce platform. So, for example, talk about sales pricing, subsequent reviews after the fake reviews got posted, any helpfulness score, so on and so forth. Then provide an ethical reflections on those fake reviews. So this is an interesting questions for students to ponder. We know that fake reviews are solicited reviews by the vendors, and they are heavily biased, but they are not truly fake in the sense that they are actually completed by users. So on the moral or ethical side perspective, how do we reckon that platforms should view these fake reviews as acceptable? To what extent they should be considered acceptable? If they are not acceptable, then on what ground? Then based on that reflections, you want to provide some suggestions for the platform on how to address those reviews. So there's a whole list of things you can suggest in here. So remove fake reviews is an obvious solution, but you can also ban the users who provide fake reviews, ban the products with fake reviews, ban the vendors with fake reviews. Some action based on your threshold from item 2C, or do nothing. And you can think of other possible solution in here to address the fake reviews. And this is where your business understanding really shine, because there's no really true answer in here, right? The questions force you to think about the ethical dilemmas in here and address it, because there's also the balance between if you forced or having too strict restrictions that can also hinder sales and the popularity of the platform. But if you don't, then that can be a problem for future users. So those are the two aspects of the challenge that you have to do in this competition: the technical side and the business report. The Kaggle website allows you to post your solutions and check it in real time. I believe there's a maximum how many submissions you can post one day. I think it's about 20 submissions. And you can post as many entries as you want. And so last year, you can see the #1 team is having 50 entries. So they have a very long history of posting and refining their model until they reach the very high score. I want to pause in here to see if there's any questions from the participants and students. You can also put your question in the chat.
Quite a bunch.
Yeah, it's Monday morning.
It's
so
early,
I don't blame.
No coffee.
Quick note also that we have the discussion board in here set up, so you can use this discussion board to post your questions. I also have a post in here for students who are seeking teams. You can post your profile in here, and other people can look for your post and contact you to form a team. As you compete in the competitions, if you have any questions, feel free to post your question in here. We will check this regularly and answer the questions. So that way, every student will be benefit from the answers. One more thing, we also want to note that although the competition asks you to produce the Kaggle solutions as part of the technical task, we want to stress that the Kaggle solution is not the only things that can enable you to be selected for the next round. There are the business tasks and the technical tasks. So the technical task only a portion of the report. So maybe it's a good time now to look at the criteria of how the model and the report will be evaluated. So there are 3 different aspects will be evaluated for the support for the submissions. Your technical accuracy and sophistications will come from your Kaggle model. How well your model is ranked against the other teams. But your report should also showcase what kind of techniques you use so that we can assess the sophistication of your technical model. Your solution also be evaluated based on the business logic and the reasonings of those logics, and how well your report is executed. So as you can see, the technical accuracy and sophistication only one part of the 3 criteria. So I have to stress in here that although you may want to form team with a technical expertise, but do not forget to include some business expert or students with a business understanding in the team to help with the business report and also the logics. I think I have questions. How do we register our team? You simply form the team and working on the competition challenge, and you can start to submit your solutions on your leaderboard. So you can go to Kaggle in here and sign up for a free account, then submit your solutions on Kaggle.
There's no prior registration.
Yes, so there's no prior registrations.
Right.
By submitting your solution in here, that indicate your intention to be part of the competitions. Now, there are also in here, if you go to the how to participate, you can see that number 3, working on the data set challenge is only step number 3. Step number 4 is when you have the solution in the report and ready to submit. Then you go to the website and submit your competition entries. So let's take a look. This is where you provide your team names, the team leader names, the email of team leaders, and all of the information of the team members. So for example, the name, the email, the majors, the university that they are currently attending. Then submit your report in here. So we recommend that you zip all of your files into one folder, one zip file, and then submit in here. The maximum is 40 megabytes. So if it's bigger than 40 megabytes, then include a link online that you can download it from your online storage. So this is your final step to submit your solutions. So your report, all of those supporting files should be zipped and then submit on the website. That's a good question. Any other questions?
Sorry. Hello. I was wondering actually regarding the paper. I know that we don't really have to focus on it too much at this point, especially with the code and everything. But are you looking, is it more so, I was looking at some of the previous winners. Do you want something more like that or more of like a research paper? Like what type of paper are you kind of, like what formatting specifically?
So we don't have a strict format for you to follow. You can certainly, actually, no, I take it back. Let me double check.
This is the format.
Actually, this is a format. So for the deliverable, so one of them is a prediction model that should be uploaded to the Kaggle site. Then for the report, we want no more than 6 pages. Then the report should have a cover page. And then executive summaries, sections for data preparations, section for data analysts, the results sections, and then anything that you want to include that not get counted towards the page limit can be put in the appendix sections. If you want to do some variation of this, you can, but as a minimum, these are the different sections we are looking for. And Sarah bring out a very important point that all of the past competitions winners has also agreed to have the submission and the PowerPoint be posted online. So students are welcome to take a look at how they execute and prepare the report. Thank you, Sarah, for that questions.
All right, perfect. Thank you.
Any other questions from students? So in the challenge, it's also outlined the detailed procedure to participate. Like I said, you don't have to pre-register to attend or to participate in the competitions. You simply just form a team and start working on it and submit your solutions. I want to note that there's going to be a workshop on March 3rd. So about almost a month from today, we will have a technical workshop in which teams can meet with the judges for the first round and have a Q&A section with them. That's going to be the workshop where you answer the technical challenge team may have, provide some hint and guidance. If needed, we can put teams into some breakout rooms to have a more in-depth discussion with the different judges. So let's say if several teams have the same problem, we put you guys into the same breakout rooms and then have the judge help you out. So it's also be helpful if you have a list of questions or list of problems getting ready for that workshop. So when we meet, we can identify quickly what are those challenge teams often have, and then put you guys into breakout rooms.
All right, I got another question.
So go ahead. Yeah, question.
So the thing is, I know that March 3rd we have the workshop, but is there any chance that we could visit the office hours of some of our favorite MIS professors to kind of see if they can give us help, or is that not allowed?
I think visiting is allowed. I think judges will be cautious in how much we receive.
Yeah.
And we would encourage faculty at all universities to follow the same procedure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Student competition. So we welcome our students always at office hours. We can talk about the competition, but we will facilitate understanding the problem, etc., rather than showing how to meet the problem.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
And we tend to give a bunch of resources that help you along the way, rather than say, hey, try this and you will be okay. One thing also note that in the past, not last competition, but when students ask questions, and if we deem that is good questions, we actually send email to all of the students. So this year we post again, if the question is useful for the students, then we're going to post in the discussion board. That way, every student will be benefit from those questions. Very good question, Sarah. Thank you. Let's see. So I think at this point, students who are interested should start forming the teams, if not already, and start downloading the challenge and start to play with it and get ready for the workshop. So tinkering with it, do some data explorations and do some initial models. Submit on the Kaggle to see how your solutions get fair against the solutions, and write down any question you may have, and get ready for the workshop on March 3rd. We want to note that for this year competitions, is some reason is the competition metrics is F1 score. Let me see if I can do this really quick. Why is because the data set is unbalanced, or I think imbalanced, right? So that's something you want to pay attention to. Okay. Read more about imbalanced data and how to address them. Do not be alarmed if the first time you submit and your score is like 0.9 or something like that, or less than 10%. So that's something that you also need to pay attention to. This is not about accuracy, but about F1 score. Okay? And anything else?
I would just reiterate what you said, which is we presented a lot of information, but it's actually pretty simple to get started. You can begin to form your team if you haven't done it already, and download the data from Kaggle and begin to explore it. We have a month before the first technical workshop, and students can, at that point, actually be quite informed about the data, any initial models, and really undercover the challenge of this. But what Professor Bowie said is really important. The technical work is only a piece in the overall puzzle. The business side of this challenge is significant and something that real e-commerce companies are facing every day. We have a couple links in the problem description for initial research that you can look at if you want to think about fake reviews and how they're impacting today's companies. And you have the opportunity to learn more about that as you're writing your final report. So reading about fake reviews in the press or in academic papers, studying the technical data and building initial exploration of the data is a great way to get started.
Is there any other questions from participants?
So we closed last time by saying we are available to you via email. So on the competition website, there's a couple of email addresses. You can write to Professor Bowie or to myself. We are available. We will be monitoring the Kaggle discussion area. So if you have questions and you want to post them in here, we will be studying that. So this is not goodbye. This recorded session is the beginning of a dialogue with students who want to pursue this competition. We're excited to kick it off today.
And have fun. Remember, this is really an education / hands-on type challenge, right? So do not forget about that. Form a team that you are comfortable in working with. Do not be afraid of finding students from different schools or different areas that you are not familiar with, because we try to promote team with a balanced skills, not just technical, but also business understanding. And have fun, and maybe the real winner is the friends you make along the way.
So true. Yeah.
All right.
Good luck, everyone.
Good luck, everyone.
We're excited to see your work.
Yeah.
Thank you.